you very much. Good morning. I'm really happy to be here this morning, finishing this conference. And I congratulate you because I know that it's going really well. And without further ado, I'm going to present here in this closing plenary speaker, the Dr. Feliciana. She's a doctor in law, moral philosophy at the University of Valencia. Nowadays, she is a professor of philosophical anthropology at University in Elche. She has also been like professor on Einstein's philosophy and the Institute of Theology, both of them in Granada. And she's taught before at the Catholic University of Murcia. She has been guest visiting professor at university in Germany and also like at the International Academy of Philosophy. She is a renowned specialist in the figure of Edith Stein, and she has gone to several conferences on Edith Stein's thought, both national and internationally. She has published like widely in Edith Stein's like philosophy, and she has translated Edith Stein's book, a philosophical prologue of Edith Stein. She has as well a teaching vocation, individuality on Edith Stein. With several published works. She's a mother of a family, and she's come here with her children, and she has 4 children. Thank you very much. And without any further ado, she's going to start her paper on Corinstian thinking of education. Good morning. Yeah. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and to be allowed to share this time with you. And I am really thankful for IASPES to invite me for this conference. I know what it means to organize a conference of these characteristics with people from different countries, with different speakers, plenary, and other speakers. And I want to thank all the organization and everybody present here. I would like to start that in these times that we have a real problem in education is that we don't know what it is for. We don't know what it consists of. It consists to educate. It is true that we have been going through different reforms, changes, different tools that we think that they're more efficient, but without knowing really where they're leading to. And if we use some methodologies, we should know what they're used for. It is not that actually we don't desire what they're for, their efficiency, but we can't even see. We don't even know what it means to teach. That's why we say that education is in crisis, the teachers in crisis. Because in this world, in this postmodern world, our crisis is not a crisis of structures, but to know what they are for, and to know what they are for, and all the structures that we once created to do something we no longer believe in should be used for, without knowing what it is we should believe in either. Anyways, I would like to talk to refer to the actuality, to the modern way of looking at Einstein's thought, the 3 systems of education that we have lived with in the last decades. Well, we could say that there are 2, but they're divided into 3. So, two different concepts that we need to differentiate to understand well what Edith Stein's going to refer to understand her proposal well, as her proposal seems like a challenge in front of these two ways. And I think that we can start talking, and she tries to explain it in another way, in a projective education. To project means to launch, to direct towards, to devise, to outline, propose, to plan and means for the execution of something. Projective education seeks to be based on society or individual. This view stems from the image of German idealism, and this we have the vision of Romanticism. In this vision, the human being is free, is, according to Lessing, Herder, Schiller, Goethe, among others. So is free, is called to perfection and to fulfill the ideal of humanity, which progressively approaches perfection. Both, therefore, its autonomy, the independence, they should awaken so the individuals progressively they reach the place it corresponds to them, and therefore it can contribute to culture and the development of the spirit. This is based on the individual and society. When we talk about projective education, we talk about a vision, an educative vision that departs from this enlightened confidence in the goodness of human nature and the power of reason. This comes from Rousseau, and it's an inheritance from Romanticism, the exaltation of feelings and subjectivity, the cult of the self and originality, as opposed to the repetition of neoclassical forms. From this point of departure, projective education considers the subject as an accumulation of potentialities, talents, and possibilities. In some things, they will be brilliant, and in others, a disaster. So it'll be necessary to discover what the subject excels at in order to enhance the talent. This requires a flexible education, attentive to the reality of the learner and not too regulated. For example, if one sees that a young pupil is gifted at painting, it usually also happens that he likes to paint. And his gift serves as a stimulus and motivation for him to paint, because he sees that he does it well. In short, it is a question of attending to his vocation, allowing the subject to express himself freely from that which by nature has been given to him as a natural gift, in order to ensure that he gives the best of himself according to his potential and interests from a human being project to sees in him the seed that, if well cared for, will become a tree. The risk of this position, well, in any case, it is an optimistic model of education from which we have inherited the search for excellence and also the criterion of success, although we have this to the social model based on their gifts and abilities. The risk of this position, which has brought about a brutal change in the vision of education, is and as like faces, the first one that she faces, as Marcus Torralba commented yesterday when he talked about the limits of education, is precisely narcissism, which is increasingly growing in our societies and universities and fed by social networks. The rejection of an education based on authority, on respect for tradition and the law, the search for truth, produces a revolution of desire which, with May 68, that revolution of May 68, represents and makes more intense the flight from reality by losing oneself in one's own image. Therefore, this education leads to narcissism because it forgets something very important: the management of failure as part of the educational project. In this model, there are no in this projected model, there are no obstacles, limits, nor from the side on the side of the learner or the educator, links or past history that make it impossible to achieve success and happiness. The best, what we say today, nowadays, in terms of this positive thinking, there is nothing that impedes to get the best version of oneself, the achievement of which depends on the strengthening of so-called positive thinking. Phrases such as, or slogans like, you can achieve it if you put your mind to it, nothing is impossible, it is in your power to be happy and successful, etc., etc. Slogans repeated by trainers to motivate students, but where failure is not tolerated, is not managed, we are not limited, we are perfect. We've been called to be perfect. Only performance, efficiency, and self-referentiality, promoted in turn by a growing technology whose use manages to isolate individuals from any real link to create a mirror in him. That this mirage, that we can be whoever he wants to be, as long as he remains enclosed within the limits of the virtual, not real, and that knowledge is unlimited and today and accessible without effort, generating a kind of mental anorexia that entails the rejection of the search for knowledge in the name of its effortless acquisition without any kind of effort, because it's enough to click on Google to have access to all kinds of information. However, this empty mirror that seems to open worlds that only manages to lock subjects in the death of instantaneous desire, creating the illusion that their life is wonderful, when it is nothing more than the pure illusion of a false ego that in turn generates multiple pathologies, among them apathy, idleness, which translate into lack of motivation in both teachers and students, lack of commitment, acedia, or laziness, etc. If we add to this the need and desire for the new, the change, the desire for change, that it is in our contemporary education, the education of excellence, or competences, or skills, whatever you want to call them, it becomes an impossible task because it prevents the management of time, freedom, and valuable assets that deserve to be preserved and passed on for the sake of a false progress, based on the belief that only innovation and prestige of all the elements of the educational process will lead to educational success. Institutions have to be excellent. Professors, students have to be excellent. Professors have to fulfill the role of excellence. With publications like Sexenius and like uh, like high research impact indexes, seminars, congresses, like conferences, all this. In the case of the institutions, this desire for requalification, to be more and more efficient, etc., etc. And the students will have to be excellent in order to be graduates. And they're led to percentages of attendance, quantification of hours, continuous assessment. So these competences, the qualification of these skills and competences, all this, well, all this generates a vision of education, even in Catholic universities, that have, or the education, Catholic universities and education have surrendered this modern model of excellence. And these criteria from Catholic leaders who must be the most effective and efficient. And this is translated into into a quantification of education of things that are not quantified, but they're qualified, but we quantify them. And this makes that education transforms itself, that contradicts its essence, its Catholic essence. That means that we have achieved by quantifying all the educational processes of a knowledge, like a knowledge that should have been a unit, and we have killed the very essence of education. Like at the bottom, the primacy of excellence impedes the conversion of individual projective education, the following model of education. This projective, based on the society-based projective education, links the enlightened progress to a certain ideology, which comes and comes from this pre-capitalist following of interests linked with different structures, like political, like law structures, and this is going to be the basis of any form, a way of forming, teaching society, the ideology of the market, the surrendering to the market that supposes all the basis of our contemporary education. And this projective education based in society, we depart from a model that we think that to educate is something that society is going to, and we're educating to something that we try to see how the society of the future is going to be like, but try to understand that society of the future, and in that way we are teaching our children today. But we don't realize the scope of that statement, the extent of that statement. There are people who make laws and devise educational programs who have a more or less clear idea of society and they wish to build in the future. And they establish an educational model whose function is to shape children so that they'll be the instruments for transforming the world, for building the new society they have planned in advance. I'm going to give you an example. If we know that the society of the future is going to be a society in which people are going to spend between 10 and 15 hours sitting at a computer, then we will need physiotherapists. So let's create a degree for them to study physiotherapy, because they're going to be very useful. Or if English is going to be the fundamental language in the future, then let's make them study English from an early age. Let's turn schools into bilingual centers. Let's demand that teachers obtain the B2 or whatever qualifications they need to be able to teach English. Any diploma necessary. So they transform themselves in bilinguals, or educate them in the values of environmentalism, recycling, the importance of renewable energies, gender ideology, etc. Because this is the criterion for projecting the society we want to build, the society that we desire to build in the future. This model hides a scientific, positivist, anthropocentric and voluntarist vision, which turns the human being into the measure of all things, the owner and master of nature. The premise of the calculation instrumental reason is fundamental to map out the society of the future, which is why science becomes technique and this becomes exploitation, an enterprise, losing the connection with the created being and with its telos, to which it should go to. To finish, this when we have this second model succeeds in molding or manipulating, from manipulus, from the Latin sense of manipulus, the one who brings to hand. So it manipulates the young people by applying the criterion of how one wishes the society of the future to be, and tries to model the new generations. In other words, they model young people in order to change the future from the point of view of the current values that govern society. Secondly, it tries by projecting what the society of the future will be like, to instruct them in what will be useful and necessary in the future from the point of view of technical training. Education is thus placed at the service of social utility. The question then is, who does education serve? What is it for? Next one, we have adaptive education. So it's the union between projective, the social-based projective education, and the criterion of economicists, market criteria in the market that we find ourselves now, which we call adaptive. What we have to do is observe society, the world as it is, as a network of structures, institutions, an economic system, a political system, a conception of truth, of good, with its own system of administrative, legal, and police organization, etc. And everything that we know is part of the world as it's given to us. And this is a superstructure. So this system unites with the ideology that we have tried to mold new generations. What we try to do here is to transform the educational system as a training So they adapt to this system. So we want to see which type of man, rather citizen and worker it is asking for, in the same way as in the projective based on society. We will teach the subject everything he has to learn in order to achieve social success in a world that is the way it is. This is why education is the train of adult life. This education model made this is going to impose like the different requirements, the years that takes actually to go through it, these different requirements to enter the world of work, all according to the prevailing society, to which the students will have to adapt to this economic model for which they are educated. Pay attention to this. We first have projected the society for the future. We educate according to this society of the future. And then, with the values that have been established, and we make the subjects to adapt to it, to that society, without perceive any internal violence. Because they're sold that their education is going to give them a profession that will give them freedom, meaning economic freedom in a system that has previously delimited what freedom means. Maria Zambrano said it when she said that we have replaced vocation with profession as a question of destiny with concern for employment. Or in other words, we have turned the world in resource and not in all, and work in profit and not in service and not vocation. In this way, the great questions of the human heart about its origin and destiny, about its mission and vocation, which have been called, are postponed, if not banished. They're unanswered, postponed, if not banished, forever. We educate in a mixture of these three models, without even reflecting on what it means to educate and what it is for. Educate by fostering talents, but in the end, we educate them according to established standards of excellence. If you don't want to become a social misfit. But of course, if we don't encourage such talents in our children, we'll feel guilty because we actually encourage them to be mediocre. Professionals without a vocation, lawyers without a vocation, stockbrokers without a vocation, or even teachers without a vocation. Second place, we educate according to the society of the future. Yeah, but to make it an instrument of progress. Subservient economic and political convenience, because predicting implies the power of transform. This is the function that power has that allows us rule societies through ideologies from a Marxist background, and they create laws like the ones we have now, and the woke culture and cancel culture. And then the following generations will assume them without any kind of risks and being very conservative or adaptive. We can educate according to the canons that rule the society in the present that we have already changed and that we have settled by law, not to risk, because the fear of future, we think that education should be like as it is now. This is why we accept the forms of the dominant discourse, the one that has been imposed on us, that has become a critical. It is the education. Education is a version of social Darwinism, adaptation to the established model, and the success, never better that, for the sake of the model survival, that only such adaptation can produce. The subject is thus educated to become. We have a new problem, and we have the problem of change. That is very interesting to comment. Our economic and political reality is constantly changing. The production model is extremely variable, so that an education that is only at the surface of economic criteria, or where technology and its dynamism is the gravitational force to adapt to the new model, to the new order, leaves education out of the game. So, does education mean defending an anthropological, social, and economical model in perpetual movement? How can we transmit what is valuable to children if we don't even know what is valuable, where everything is subject to change? Why is there so much interest today in opposing innovation and tradition in education? Is progress an end in itself? Tradition means. Does progress mean elimination of nature, elimination of all limits, to eliminate the concept of human being? It seems so, because tradition means anchoring oneself to the past, and progress means moving towards the future, because the old world is a hindrance, and to stop is to die, as Jean-François Bellamy said in his great book. It is not for nothing that numerous universities are appearing with their masters and postgraduate courses on artificial intelligence, aware that the future is at stake in it and not in the reflection on its virtualities and or potential damage. That's why we're turning education in simple management of soft skills capable of taking on change and new challenges, much more than strong, solid, and stable skills over time. Experience and wisdom have ceased to be an input when education has been subjected to the master of an unstable productive system. Is education not a servant of the prevailing nihilism, which tells us that everything changes and nothing remains? Maybe we don't know where we're going because we don't expect anything. Isn't it true that we have stopped waiting that there is good and truth when the world is changing, and therefore it's not important to educate for goodness, beauty, to educate, to introduce into truth, to educate that into the world and the era of fragmentation? Everything is related to an ultimate fundament that makes sense to the whole unit. Isn't our education a way to get away from time, from death? Have we started to think that we are made for eternity? All this brings the vision of the world in which error is not contemplated. Time is not a grace. It is not a time when everything is united, when all the requirements of the human heart is united in study, settlement of the potencies, time, Wittgenstein invites us to another thing in front of all this. That's why her thought is so modern. That's why we need to reflect to see who we are and who we teach. She was a real educator, a tireless seeker of truth, a philosopher with infinite interest in man. Yeah. She participated. It is less known that her, her worries about education come actually from her youth, from her university years, from she had the legacy of this German idealism. In particular, members of the pedagogical group criticized the university's inability to generate proposals that would help to train future educators. However, in the criticism of these young university students, Wittgenstein found nothing constructive and much confusion. And this dissatisfaction would accompany her throughout her life, giving rise to a more mature response in a series of works and lectures that you can find in number 4, which deals with her anthropological and pedagogical writings. We're not interested in Wittgenstein just because she was a person concerned with this subject, or because she has written some works on the subject, but because her way of describing the educational relationship frees us from a number of ideological prejudices, such as those we have just pointed out in the models described. Prejudices which are already part of our language and which make it difficult for us to understand what education really is. First of all, Wittgenstein insists that all education work is with the professionalization of the process, of the educational process. And the second one she refers to is the conversion of education in ideology, to the service of ideology, that it was her own, describing what happened in the statal and totalitarian systems, Marxist and capitalist, both of them. That's why she highlights that all educational work is accompanied by a certain conception of man. It is not possible to have an education which, under the veil of neutrality, dispenses with a conception of the human being and of the world. Those who claim a neutral education also maintain a certain image of man and of reality, only they disguise it under a supposed neutrality precisely in order to inculcate it better, to prevent it from being subjected to criticism. This is typical of statist and totalitarian systems. For Wittgenstein, each person is a free and unique subject. A person is not a particular case of a general species. We cannot elaborate an abstract scheme of what is human and then try to fit the concrete individual into it, even if we shoehorn them into schemes. Ideological schemes try to explain what man is by reducing him to simple and easily manageable categories: a social class, a job, a race, etc. Reducing the richness and variability of the concrete man to these simple expressions, thus limiting his personal richness. The first characteristic that is decisive for the possibility of a true educational relationship is then freedom. Man is not a prefixed system. His evolution is not predetermined, but he has before him multiple possibilities as well as the capacity to decide freely between these possibilities. In other words, to educate is to build the person, but it is that person who wants to build themselves and who decides which possibilities of reality are most attractive to them. But this vision that all formation is self-formation doesn't mean that it's in the hands of the subject or the individual. It is not just that. It's not what she says. If I put a beautiful painting in front of a child and I expect them to learn all the characteristics of that painting, the artist, the period in which it was painted, the influence it had on later painters, it's everything. But I don't awaken in them an interest in that painting, the surprise at the beauty of the painting that allows them to relate the painting to the ultimate meaning of beauty. I may get them to pass an exam, but I have made very little or no progress in the development, in the training of that child. If I do that, if I act like that, if I act as so many teachers act nowadays, as for example, or second year of baccalaureate, to pass the Spanish levels, I'm a terrible educator who's given an answer to a question that the child hasn't even asked yet. That they are a long way from even asking themselves that question. So the first thing that needs to be awakened is the child's freedom. It only makes sense to explain a painting if one has first succeeded in making it enter the horizon of the desire to know of the person one wants to educate. Wittgenstein insistently affirms that an education that is not responsible to the concrete freedom of the learner is training, but not education. A dog is trained to become the guardian of a flock, or the guardian of a house, or even to work in an airport. That is to say, to do what we want it to do. We can train people, not just dogs, to make it an instrument of our social system. A person is trained because we don't want an education that is aimed at his or her concrete and therefore full development according to their own destiny, but rather we want them to become a cog in the wheel of the state or the market. The way in which education systems in modern states train their citizens by putting them at the service of the state or their market. We know it, and it was described by Wittgenstein in 1930. Doesn't it sound a bit too much like the education system that we have described? Doesn't it sound a bit like how we understand every educational relationship, even within the family, even between parents and children? Wittgenstein found in her time an educational system heir to the Enlightenment ideal. The Enlightenment ideal in the field of education is seen as a house in demolition. According to her, she says, the prevailing ideal of education here was that of knowledge, if possible completely encyclopedic, the usual idea of the soul, that of the tabula rasa, on which one must write what one can by intellectual understanding and mnemonic stamping. Here and there a piece of wall, the arch of a window, in the meantime a pile of rubble. In the middle of this and that, a new building is being erected. Is it possible to clear all this away and on a firm foundation to erect a new building according to unitary plan? That's one of Wittgenstein's statements. The effort is there. For years we have been seeking the struggle for a new concept of education, which is basically a very old concept of education. It's deep inside a concept of education that is very old. Liechtenstein refers to the unity of knowledge and the task of education as opposed to fragmentation. Opposed to fragmentation that made all positivism, modern positivism, possible. Moreover, she also feared a positivist explanation of reality that was limited. An education limited to simple facts, disjointed, meaningless, reductive of reality and its relationship to the whole being. That's why freedom is the core element of an educational relationship. But freedom, that freedom is not a tabula rasa. It is not an abstract freedom, but a freedom that is awakened by the concrete possibilities of the real, by the materials that the educator selects. That's why the first task of the education is to awaken in the learner the attraction to the real. That's why it's very important to select those aspects of reality that can help freedom to be set in motion. Where are these materials to be drawn from? They are the materials the human history, tradition, has shown to be valuable. There's nothing to invent here. On the contrary, what I have to do is to get to know the best that my culture offers me. My culture. But the educational relationship is built on the living encounter with tradition, an encounter from which you can draw, from which you learn the way of relating to reality, to things and to others. Provide with God, providing me with meaningful spaces that I as a learner am called upon to discover. Tradition is, it's more than, it's the only way to be free. It's not a museum artifact, nor a jail. Tradition is the way to be free. If I want to teach German to a friend, I want to teach a German friend what good Serrano ham is. If I wanted him to taste Serrano ham, to taste the reality that he doesn't know, I give him a taste of pata negra ham, the best one. If I want to awaken a child's taste for literature, I don't give him a packet of detergent to read, but one of the great classics, the Quixote, Shakespeare, or one of these great ones that have made, that are part of our universal literature, that have awakened in so many people before the taste for literature. Therefore, the essential prerequisite for being an educator is to have previously brought one's own freedom into play in order to get to know at first hand, in a lively way, the jewels offered by one's own tradition. That it is these pata negra hams. This way, we have already awakened in him, in that child, a taste for the real, that which the learner perceives as the passion of the teacher. Liechtenstein defines education as formation, as the configuration that the human personality assumes under the influence of multiple formative forces. These formative forces, to which he refers, are the influences on the subject produced by the cultural goods of society in which they find themselves. There are no forces if they are not charged with meaning, with something valuable that is like the response to concerns, the tension to fulfill oneself that the human being has. For this reason, the work by Velázquez is not a mere matter. It is not just oil on canvas, but a cultural asset which it captures the subject's interest, shapes, forms, brings them to maturity. Our interior world and the exterior world. There's very little left. I'm finishing. Therefore, one of the main visions that Edstein has on education is this bridge between individuality, freedom, and relation. We're not talking about a freedom, a subjective freedom, an individualist freedom, but freedom that sets in motion in front of good exercise of the accompaniment of the educator and the materials that the teacher uses and tradition. Only from there can we awaken the emotion, the passion, the desire to look for, to seek, and to find truth. Only in that way, she says, the spirit is active and rationally we could when the boy has learned about like loads of different cultural artifacts, and they can appreciate like the beauty in them, it has a criteria to distinguish, to value the positive elements, the valuable elements in these works of art, and the relationship with the beautiful of the real being. Then is when the person is prepared to act and move alongside with the spirit, intellectual spirit, and they feel they're pushed to make that their own essence shows its efficacy to the exteriors in facts and works. That means formation is not only passive, it starts generating cultural goods. To finish, as we said, we have announced the topic of the limits. The limits that are fundamental to, it's fundamental to educate in the limit. From nothing you can't educate. That's why if we learn what we've done so far, there is no perfect formula to educate except pata negra. The teacher is conscious of the limits, of course, but these limits are in the educator and in the learner, in the student. That's why Wittgenstein is very conscious of the individuality concept, because it leaves individuality to the destiny of the particular individual that transforms the work of the educative work that is left. And it is not to depend on relativism. It's a real realism. It's look at things as they are and not transformed into caricatures. It's to show and to bear in mind the mystery and what the person in concrete is. Individuality is the last mystery that no man can penetrate completely. To want to penetrate it is an absurd task. The attention to individuality doesn't mean to fall into relativism that makes it impossible to do it. It means passion for the destiny of the other, to know what the subject of the education doesn't know its destiny and needs to be accompanied to discover to which they are called. From nothing we can't educate, but nor from relativism. It's a criterion. This personal richness is not going to be a relative. There's why there's only one way to approach the teacher for Edstein. Only one way that allows the other accompany a real feeling, real passion that permits us to accompany the student. That has, of course, a lot of problems, and she points out that in her time that we lack enough teachers with that passion. The risk in this adventure, and that's true, that even the students go to school as if they had been like, as if their capacity to be amazed by the world has been taken off them, and they isolate themselves. They can't, or they don't want to express their personality. Their, they want to express freely, and it's like bouncing off a wall. And that's why she insists on the importance to understand not only the moment that we are in this schoolroom, but as well that we're part of this work. To end, and I finish, the teacher is not alone. And we said it yesterday as well. We're not alone in this education, the task of education. We have the mystery of the education of the being. It's an answer, not just like a choice. Somebody has called before. Human being is destined to find their own destiny, and it's a way that is completely personal. It's his path with capital letters. His path is not the path that he chooses for himself according to his own will, but the path along which God leads him. The Christian educator understands that faith is a path of love and self-given. She says, those live in faith is proper to the reason and the heart, the work of the will and action. Whoever teaches how to awaken it teaches all the energies, but it can only be awakened if all forces are brought into play, not only through a dry teaching of the intellect, and not only through a sentimental fullness, which produces fanaticism, but through a religious formation which, from the fullness of one's own religious life, leads to the depths of divinity and knows how to express God in his kindness, love, and guarantees it with works. In this way, the soul opens itself to all the fullness of the world, and thus an inexhaustible number of formative elements which can enter it, build it, and transform it. The possibility of accepting this faith is only possible through the experience of God's love in our lives. Therefore, whoever puts his life in the hands of God can be sure, and only them can be sure, that it'll be them, they'll be themselves, that is, he will become what God has planned for him personally. I finish because it's very late. Anyways, I don't know if it helped to understand what we can do with Einstein nowadays, but I want to keep education because hope is this desire that is in the human heart. We think that in our world that we are in the era of post-truth, like multiple stories of reality transformed with other truths. But there is a desire for truth, of beauty, vocation, call for destiny that we face all our lives. Thus, educate is to attend to the mystery of the concrete human, even if the greatness of this mystery can be increasingly intuited and cultivated. Taking care of relationship with God as a relationship with destiny, as a desire to be with God. Therein lies the hope of true education, which no state or political party can take away from us, and which consists in understanding that there is in the heart of every man a vocation, a call to destiny, from which we live and face all reality, all life. We could establish some lines for the future. One, like the overcoming between the dualism between faith and reason that Wittgenstein even tries to tackle. That we even have at universities, Catholic universities, and we need to reflect on this, because it is not only the Christian as an addendum that has been put into like another resource in institutionals, or a plus, a bonus. There has to be more. Reality is not neutral. We should recover a sense of reason. There has to be there must be proposal. Sorry for the word, but there's no other. There must be tradition, a way of understanding life, the good, beauty, which must be constantly constructed with reality. This is like, I am the way for truth. We should recover the sense of time as a gift, of leisure as academic time connected to the being, time for studying, for silence, prayer, time that links our life, existential life, to eternity. It is not leisure against work, and work is the source for profit. It is not. We will not live it in the same way as for this person for whom is a vocation. The gift is a gift, grace, a meeting place, a presence. Like abundance, to be a time for silence, time for prayer. Only that way we won't live fragmented in this time of hurries, moments, deadlines, designs, temporary knowledge that is just in formation, etc., etc. And for that, it is necessary to recover the concept of truth. That is not other thing but a position of like closed position. This is the ideology. That the one who loves truth more than their own positions, it's always open to dialogue, because they never mind changes ideas when they see that they're wrong. But the educator, if it's humble, it's never relativist. They seek truth because they know the truth is there. It's out there. That's why they seek the seeker, because it exists. Only Christ prevails. Only He is the answer to the answer of truth. Only with them we can have an education that departs from desire from our heart and our desire to seek for truth, and that's our only hope. We can have a lot of lines, have a lot of resources, methodologies, but if we forget this, we forget the essence. I wish this is not lost. This meaning of education is not lost. And even more Catholic education. That is the education we need to recover nowadays. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Feliciana, por esta profunda conferencia. Nos has hecho el panorama.
Thanks very much, Feliciana, for this great speech, and we have talked about the topic of what education is. You have given us the answers of Einstein. We thank you very much for this answer, and there's no time. We don't have time for any questions. I'm sorry, it's the best. Like, questions are the best. I'm really sorry, but we don't have time. We must go on and move on to the next people in our program. But if anybody has any questions, they can ask you, like out in the corridors, etc. Thank you very much.